to control the permissions or access to the resource or the objects. Okay. In mandatory access control model, even though you may be the owner of the file or the resource, you cannot really set the permissions for that object, especially for others. Okay. So it is the system or the administrator who normally sets the permissions for that resource. Okay. So you may be just a user and you may be the owner of that file or object, but you cannot say, I want someone else to read this file. You cannot decide that. The system administrator will decide that. Okay. Why? In a discretionary model, as we'll see later also, the discretionary model lets a user to choose his own will, right? If I like someone, I want them to get access to the file, even though it may not be ethical to give the permission person the access to that file. Whereas the mandatory access control model, it is uniform, system-wide. If someone cannot be given permission to a file, that person will not be given access to that file. Okay, so no matter you are the owner of the object or whatever that file, you cannot give the permission to that user. Okay. Now, dynamic access control model is somewhat different from the previous two in the sense that here, initially a user has access to all the resources before he really accesses any of them. So think about like at the time of login. Once you log in, right, you have access to all the resources out there. But once you start accessing a particular resource, then which other resources you can access depends on what resources you have already accessed. Okay, so that's why it's called dynamic access control. So for a particular login session, so if you have if there are, say, we'll see all the details later, but let's say there are 6 resources like this, and there may be a policy that if you access object A, you cannot access object B. Okay, that's how they are related. There's a conflict of interest. That's what we'll say. So at the time of login, you can access any of the 6. But once you access object A, you cannot access object B, and vice versa. Okay, so you are kind of track dynamically what you are accessing, and depending on that, you are controlled which other objects you can access. Okay. For all these models, we'll see an example. So discretionary, we'll see the Unix case, and the mandatory access control, we'll see this. If you have taken my other course, we'll see the what is that multi-level security database where this poly-instantiation thing will come up. We'll visit this again in this course also. Okay. And this, there is an example called the Chinese wall model, right? So here, so why it's called that? It's just an analogy. It's a very tall, right? Have you seen that? You haven't seen that? What? The Chinese wall.
Great wall. Oh,
yeah. Sure. So it's very tall, right?
It's very long.
Long. Is it tall?
Yeah,
reasonably. Okay. I think the name came because it was tall. The reason is, as long as you are on the top, you are not on either side of the wall, you are on the top of the wall, right? You can jump this way or that way. Makes sense, right? Not only Chinese wall, any wall. Or as long as you are on the top of the wall, you can jump either way, this way or that way. But once you jump one side, it's very difficult to jump to the other side. That's why I asked, is it very tall to climb and jump to the other side? So that's the analogy why this is classified under this. As I said, the idea is very simple. Once you access some object, you cannot access the other objects. And that is a rule. What objects are having conflict of interest to what other objects. So we'll see an example later. The role-based model is kind of the most scalable. Scalable means what? Can be applied to a large number of users. And this is what is used mainly in database applications if we have more users. Okay? Because all these things are really very user specific. Okay, so this particular user can access this object and this user can access this object and so on. Whereas this is based on the role, which means you may have 1,000 users or 1 million users, but you could classify all those users to different roles. Like for example, all of you are under one role, what is that? Students. And all of us are under one role, faculty. And all administrators could be classified as administrators, right? So even though there may be like 10,000 people in Jackson State, all these people could be grouped into 3 different roles: students, faculty, and administrators. Then you don't decide whether a particular student can do this, particular student by name can do this. It doesn't matter who is the student. If a student can do something, and any student can do it. The faculty can do something, any faculty can do this, and so on, right? So if you want to do certain things, don't check by the username, check by the role that they have in the system, right? And the role could change dynamically also. The user could be asked to select what role they want at the time of their login. So a person may be an administrator, but at the time of login, if he chooses to be just a faculty, then he can do only what a faculty can do. Okay? And also it's very important to limit action to the least. For example, if you can do something as an administrator as well as a faculty, it's better to allow the person to use the least privileged role, in the sense that use the faculty role rather than the administrator role to access something. If you can do something with the minimum role privilege that you have, then that should be the role that should be allowed. Okay? So we'll see all these details in the next classes. So we stop here.